I've got Tim Mack joining us from Ukraine later on in the program, and also Rick Wilson to talk about what's going on with the Republican Party these days. I want to know your sense, and this is really atmospheric more than political.
Mhm.
What is going on with Jeff Epstein, the late Jeff Epstein, and Donald Trump? He can't seem to separate himself from this guy in the Trump world.
So, boy, you're gonna get me to go down certain rabbit holes. Like I feel like the fact that this is the dominant narrative of the moment you and I are living in, Chris, is the culmination of what happens when the information ecosystem is controlled by crowdsourcing and algorithms rather than by facts and what is true and what isn't. You know, the reason why I think why Trump can't shake this Epstein story is that the MAGA, I always look at it this way. The MAGA movement is in two parts. One part Trump created with his populist economic push, right? His anti-establishment messaging. And that is sort of very mainstream. Then there's another piece of the MAGA movement that's extraordinarily conspiratorial, the QAnon wing. Think about it as the Ron Paul. Remember the Ron Paul types that you'd run into back in 2008 and 2012? They weren't always on. They were a little bit, these were people that have been communicating by newsletters before anybody thought newsletters were cool. And real conspiratorial rabbit hole stuff. And there's this, and Trump essentially borrowed these folks, right? He said, "Oh, you believe in these conspiracies? Okay. Me too," right? Or at least would wink and a nod, right? This is QAnon. This is like, there's a whole group of people out there, Chris, that believe there's this group of pedophiles that run the world, that it's some elite. And so Trump, I think, is for whatever reason, is afraid to admit he's a part of the Epstein club because for some of his supporters, they believe Epstein is the proof of this larger sort of conspiracy out there that pedophiles run the world. And so I think that's the issue, is that he borrowed an irrational portion of a base, right? That isn't going to, there's no piece of information that the government releases that's going to confirm to these folks that, hey, Jeffrey Epstein was the pedophile. A lot of rich and famous people got suckered to riding on his plane for free because they're all suckers for free plane rides. But none of them were also pedophiles. But it doesn't matter. Trump is afraid to admit that he had a friendship with him. And it seems and we know that that's going to be all over the files. And that's what he fears, and that this will, for a group of his supporters, whoa, Trump's one of them, not one of us, right? And ultimately, that's, for the longest time, this Trump, these conspiracy folks thought, hey, Trump's one of us. And this would be the first time he comes across as, oh, maybe you are part of the deep state. I think that's why.
Well,
but
he has the old
I get really frustrated by
this.
this.
Cover up the
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
All the pictures, all the logbooks, all the evidence that he was in cahoots with Jeffrey Epstein. And he seems to be largely denying that he was an associate of the guy.
Well, and this is what's so stupid. One of my favorite pieces of political advice came in the movie Clear and Present Danger, where Harrison Ford, the president in that movie, there's this little sidebar, little storyline that the president had a big donor who was getting in trouble. And he was getting political advice that said, hey, distance yourself from the donor. Harrison Ford, playing Jack Ryan, overhears this and says, oh, no. If they ask if he's a friend, you say, no, he's a close friend. If they ask if he's a close friend, you say, no, he's my best friend. Basically, don't let proof of a relationship become a negative story for you. Take that off the table. You have a relationship with him. It doesn't mean you didn't know that he had bad business deeds, right? Why Trump wants to deny a relationship with Epstein, which is provable around, is the head scratcher here. But this may get at, why it may get at it is Trump fully thinking straight here on this story, or because he's gotten away with BSing the country for so long, he just assumes he can play a Jedi mind trick here and do it again. But I don't get why he's done that, because he's now made proving relationship with Epstein a news story. when he
Yeah,
could have said, yeah, we were friends. I dumped him before about all this other stuff, which was kind of the narrative that was already out there.
this reminds me of the old Alger Hiss case back in the early 50s, where uh, Alger Hiss denied he ever knew Whittaker Chambers from Time magazines. And Whittaker Chambers, who's later accused him of being Alger Hiss of being a spy. Yeah, well, I know all about him. He knew about the warbler and all that. I know about the kind of bird watching he did. All this information that Frank Mankiewicz wants it to be. Once he knew about the warbler, then I knew that Alger Hiss was guilty. So denying the relationship just seems crazy. What about the world out there? To think about, uh, I just looked it up that the Pizzagate situation broke in 2016. I mean,
Hmm.
that's 9 years ago. 9 years ago, a guy with a shotgun walked into our family pizza parlor in Chevy Chase
Right.
in Northwest Washington and started blowing the place apart because he thought that that's where the pedophiles were.
Right. No, this is what I don't think we fully appreciate. This is where I think there's been a lack of coverage on this part of the story, which is, hey, we've been just like when the Know Nothings attacked Washington, D.C., based on a conspiracy theory about the Catholics and the Pope in the 1850s.
Yeah.
We now have an entire sort of new narrative being driven by what might be just a conspiracy theory built by people who followed a cult like movement called QAnon, who still are out there. I mean, Chris, Michael Flynn, who is kind of the unofficial pope of QAnon these days, uh, put out an entire lengthy, I'd say clearly 1,000-word Twitter post, pushing back at Trump, saying, "Hey, we're not ignoring this. With all due respect, Mr. President." There's a lot of people, and this is where Trump's running into a problem. A guy like Mike Flynn has financially benefited from catering to this conspiratorial QAnon crowd. And there's a whole bunch of people in this ecosystem that financially makes money off of this conspiracy theory, and they can't let it go. And so letting it go actually it means getting rid of a financial lifeline if you're Mike Flynn. And so I think you can't underestimate that angle to this, to why this isn't going away among his base.
Let's think about the base, the MAGA base, and those on the fringe who do buy
Hmm.
into all, which sounds like most of them now because of the way it's been broadcast now. Uh, they don't get to see the big houses that the wealthy live in. They don't get to
Hmm.
see the flying private jets, general aviation. So, but they can't really imagine that because they never see it. They don't know what it feels like.
Right.
Somehow, I think they can feel the young girls thing, uh, and somehow their imaginations stretch to this particular area where they can imagine people getting away with something that they know is wrong, morally and legally. But it seem odd that they would focus on this particular thing, child trafficking.
Well, I think it is. There's always been a part of me that thought that the reason they make this, they want to make the front door to this conspiracy theory child trafficking, is that it creates empathy for these conspiratists who are also ruminating. I mean, don't underestimate the Epstein story and its ability to get traction with the far right, on the Jewish angle. There's a whole anti-Semitic aspect to the obsession with Epstein, on the right. This is sort of, um, as my friend Daniel Silva put it, MAGA has been sort of bathing in there's a part of MAGA that bathes in anti-Semitism. And the Epstein story, you don't have to go too far to see some of these pretty far right figures who have always been in that world, sort of do that as well. But I think I've always viewed the child trafficking thing as a way to, um, make them look better to society. Hey, you may not believe my conspiracy theory, but my heart's in the right place.
Yeah, it's like international conspiracy. It's
Hmm.
one of those roving international conspiracies. I just think here's the question: when will this break between Trump become real, or
Hmm.
will we be distracted from it? Will he once again do one of those wonderful
Yeah.
cover and escape situations like the president's been able to do. Get away from the trouble. Escape.
Look, we've seen a lot of summers. Sometimes I think our brains have been fried by the Trump era. But think about it, Chris. If we hadn't gone through the sort of the anxiety of the Trump era as journalists, as you and I have done, we'd have said, "Oh, this is one of those summer stories that once the calendar turns to Labor Day and there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on, this will kind of fade in the background," right? Remember, and so that sometimes you see that. Like I think about Barack Obama and the beer summit. That was a summer story that got out of hand. Labor Day comes, kind of the pages turn. That doesn't mean it doesn't leave a mark. But let me bring up a story where I think it is going to be. I will say this. I think the real risk of a divide in MAGA has to do with how the government is in cahoots with big tech. I think there's a portion of MAGA, like the Bannon wing of MAGA, where Steve Bannon is against concentrated power, period. Whether it's concentrated power in the tech world, concentrated power in government, concentrated power in culture, right? He's kind of a purist in that sense, which is why he was a fan of Lena Khan, okay, on the left, Biden's FTC chair, because they shared a concern about concentrated power in big tech. And there's a story that's actually out there now where you have companies, there's people inside Trump's Justice Department, a J.D. Vance former staffer who runs sort of the antitrust division, who's been targeting a merger by Hewlett Packard. And Hewlett Packard's been working the lobbyist community because there's that Trump is very transactional. There's always a pay to play angle to get out of government scrutiny. But then there are actual true believers in the MAGA movement who think there should be government scrutiny to these major corporate mergers and this attempt to consolidate power. I actually think that over time is how the MAGA movement splits apart. They're the true believers, right? Why did Joe Rogan go from Sanders to Trump? Look, he was kind of anti-establishment. And the more Trump behaves as the establishment, come to me if you want your merger protected, come to me if you want your tariffs lowered, that actually is going to work against those in the MAGA movement that truly believed he was breaking down the establishment. And this is why Epstein is symbolic, right? The Epstein files are being withheld by the establishment. So it's sort of in a weird way, it's a symbolic test of whose side is Trump on. Those that want to break up the establishment or those that want to protect those that know the right people to stay in power. And that is the real risk, I think, that Trump has with his movement. And that's when you'll know the movement is fracturing, when you start to see some of them leave, and you're seeing it now, right? You're seeing it with Epstein, but it could happen with more real world problems like corporate mergers.
That's a great question, the breakup and when it'll occur. I remember hearing a wonderful story of Teddy Roosevelt, who's on everybody's list of favorite presidents, I think. And Teddy said, I didn't run in 1908. I let Taft run. And the reason I didn't run is I promised I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't run for a full term. And I knew that if I did it, people would say, yeah, I get it. He's a politician. But I never wanted to say about me. I never wanted to say, he's just another politician. You can't trust him. They lie. They do what they want for their own self-interest. And he said, so I didn't do it. I always said it was wonderfully admirable about him, about Teddy Roosevelt in that moment where he said, I'm not, because I said I wouldn't do it. And I want that my word means something to people. And if Trump, I think, as you say, if he falls into the trap of being just like every other Paul, just like every establishment figure, just another guy protecting wealth and elitism, he's one of the bad guys.
That's right.
I think that's an astounding assumption or not prediction. We'll see. Chuck, I love having you on because you think out loud. There's no separate.
It's a nice way of putting it.
No separate Chuck Todd. There's just Chuck Todd with the truth.
Well, that's you. I mean, in some ways, that's, you've been a model of this, is that thinking out loud. I've always said that. I think out loud. You're absolutely right. And I think it's the best way to bring people along on a journey.
Well, it's, as we used to say in the old days, that's great television.
Hey,
Really,
it's this video. It's great Substacking, brother.
okay. You can't beat that. Thank you so much on Substack, Chuck Todd. Thank you so much for coming on today. Let me
You got it,
bring in.
brother.
We're going to bring in somebody from Ukraine who's really in the battle to tell us what's going on over there, what's going on with the fight, which we've all been watching intently, and what's going on with Zelenskyy. So let's find.
Zelenskyy.
Pardon me. Anyway, we're going to find out what's going on with him too. Well, anyway, that's what we're trying. We're trying to do a lot of technical difficulties at least today. I can't figure out sometimes about the internet. I love it. Of course, we all love it. But to trying to figure out when it's working is another part of a situation. And finding out when it's going to work, it cost us 10 minutes this morning. That's why we were late. I didn't like being late. I don't like being late. For about 30 years, I was on time for work when I worked for a network. And I always did make a point of getting there, 10 minutes before the show, I'd write my close. And then I'll say 20 minutes before, and then I'd take a 10-minute nap, which is magical because I would wake up like a character out of the movies, like
Rip Van Winkle.
some guy that woke up. All of a sudden, the eyes wake up, and all of a sudden, person's awake. So,
Rip Van Winkle.
sort of like a bad guy in the movies, like a Frankenstein or the other guy. Anyway, have we got the guy yet? Have we got him yet? No, not Tim Mack yet. Okay. Well, I'd really like to go on, find out what's going on because Trump has been playing tough with Putin. He's saying I'm going to shorten my 50-day deadline for you to start playing ball and negotiating a deal. Anyway, we're going to right now. Tim Mack, thank you for joining us. And I guess the question is, a big question is Trump really going to hold Vladimir Putin, to his shortened timetable?
How many days does Vladimir Putin get? You have to wonder, right? So right now we're in the middle of this 50-day period after which Donald Trump is supposedly going to impose heavy sanctions on Russia. But he's had plenty of time to take a harsher stance on Russia and and Putin's regime. We haven't seen any evidence that he's willing to take those steps. We haven't seen any evidence that he wants to impose greater sanctions. He wants to take a tougher role. He'll say a few things from here or there, but he's been actually much harsher on the Ukrainians than he's been on the Russians.
So what does he want to happen? That Putin changes his mind and says, I'm not going to rebuild the Soviet Empire, which seems like a mighty decision to anybody to make? Or does he hope that the Ukrainian government falls because of corruption scandals?
Well, I think what he had hoped is to come into office with a Ukraine that was so dependent on the United States for help that he could twist Zelensky's arm and make him agree to a peace deal at almost any cost, and that he'd be hailed as the savior and peacemaker because of that. And it turns out that's not the case. That the Ukrainians have a lot of fight in them and aren't willing to achieve peace, temporary peace, at any cost at all. They're interested in a durable peace, a just peace, and that's not something that we see that's on the table right now. And that's why so few people here in Ukraine think that peace is something that's likely to occur in the next near period of time.
Do they think that Russia would say, okay, we'll have a truce now, but rebuild their forces, recruit more people, perhaps people from other countries like the North Koreans or whatever, and start a real effort to recruit their own people, and they'll come back in strength? Is that what they're afraid of? Is that what they're afraid of right now? The Ukrainian people?
It's frozen.
I think we've got some enduring technical difficulties.
Go ahead.
Well, here we go. Well, let's try again. What do you think the Ukrainian people, the people themselves, feel about the future of their country?
It sounds like I might be back. Do you want to repeat your question, Chris?
Sure. I want to know, what do the Ukrainian people think about their country's future?
Well, look, here's the thing about it is that it's never been about fighting for Zelensky personally. It's been about fighting for the existence of Ukrainian sovereignty. Ukrainians actually have a um, real interest in protest, civic action. You saw this week, actually, after Zelensky passed or signed a piece of legislation that rolled back independent anti-corruption watchdogs in the government. You saw an eruption of protests on the street in the government district right in front of Zelensky's office. That's the first major protest that have occurred since the full-scale invasion started 3 years ago. And so Ukrainians understand that they're not just fighting for Zelensky's government, they're fighting for integration with Europe, democratic principles, a less corrupt, less Soviet, less Russia-oriented country. That's the reason why so many people are dying on the front lines on a daily basis. That's the reason why there are civilians dying in Kyiv and in every major city in Ukraine. That's the reason why I think Donald Trump totally misunderstood what sort of leverage he would have over Ukraine and Zelensky, because they're fighting on different principles and with different motivations than the average person or diplomat, government fights with or makes decisions on.
Yeah. And so he didn't understand that the true nationalism of the Ukrainian people for their own country, and regardless of who leads it, they want to be independent. It sounds like they also want to be something like a Scandinavian country. They want to be, I shouldn't single them out, but a clean government, a country that's not a controversial government, but one that does have questions about who's paying who.
We lost him.
Well, I think we've lost Tim Mack for a while in Ukraine. I guess we're going to have to be patient here today with our technology today, which it seems to persist. We're going to bring up Rick Wilson. Rick Wilson's a real leader in the Lincoln Party, the Lincoln Project, which is sort of a reformed version of the Republican Party, has rejected MAGA all the way, has built a party with a sort of notion of a Northern California Republican Party, a moderate party politically, ideologically, but a party that seems to be the old New York Rockefeller Party, if you will, something like it. Nothing is ever exactly the same as what it was. But the kind of party that was once supported by the New York Herald Tribune, for example, back in the 60s when it was the New York Tribune was still around. Looks like that's not necessarily working right now. Chuck Todd talked about perhaps Trump breaking up or losing his contact with MAGA, the MAGA people being more ferociously MAGA than they are ferociously pro-Trump. And you have to ask yourself, when does that occur? Because there always are breakups. There are schisms in every movement, including the church, where people go different directions, east and west. And that's the way they do it, because that's the way people tend to be, nationalistic and regionalistic, actually. I think the question of this overriding, strange Jeffrey Epstein story is so culturally distant from a lot of people.
Tim is back.
We're right back with Tim. Tim, I guess the question is Zelensky, the courageous, I believe, leader of Ukraine, is he fighting a two-front war now against the communists, or we used to call them the communists, the Russians, and his own question of his own integrity?
Well, look, any democratic leader has to balance foreign obstacles with domestic popularity, right? And Zelensky is no exception in that regard. He's got to make sure that, for one, during war there are no elections, right? So his presidential mandate extended to about last year, and so he has, as a result of the war, not had to run for re-election. In extenuating circumstances,
Yeah.
he needs to be exceptionally attuned to what people want, or they're going to be out in the streets against him. The fact of the matter is, I haven't heard a single good reason why Zelensky signed this piece of legislation, which removed the independence of anti-corruption bodies in Ukraine. I haven't heard a single good reason for it. And all of the non-spoken reasons, indicate, at the very least, sketchy operations in the Ukrainian government. And
You,
that's something
but
very, very worrisome.
sketchy meaning you don't know what they look like. You're not sure they're negative.
Involved sort of thing that he wants to cover up, or he knows people who are involved in things that he wants to cover up. I mean, there's no other reason to remove
Yeah.
the independence of anti-corruption organizations during a time of war, when people are really concerned about eliminating corruption in the Ukrainian government. No good reason to do that. And the way, I mean, we're getting really into the weeds here, but basically this legislation was snuck through the Ukrainian parliament with very little, with almost no consideration by the public. The legislation wasn't available for people to review, and it was a surprise to almost everyone when it was passed and then signed hours later. It really seems like the Ukrainian government just thought they could get this through without anyone noticing. But of course,
We're having problems there again. I don't know where the problems are this week. Um, he'll be back in a moment, I guess. Tim, are you back?
I'm still here, Chris.
Yeah. What do you think the people of Ukraine, as they're considering all this situation, they're not going to stop fighting, as you point out. They're going to fight for their country, its independence, its joining of with NATO. They want it to be a regular country, a clean country politically. Um, is the culture of Ukraine appropriate? Are they really thinking about themselves? Are they thinking they can be this good government?
There is this real kind of almost genetic part of Ukrainians' identities of themselves as a kind of people who will corruption bodies that are the site of all these protests this week. They were put into enforcement at the Maidan revolution just over a decade ago. And so they are themselves the result of massive street protests. Ukrainians take a lot of pride in their ability to show up and have the government bend to their general will. And so, well, here's the ironic part about it as well: is that Zelensky himself ran on a platform of good governance. If you go back, you think, okay, well, Zelensky, before he was a politician at all, he was an actor and a comedian. And he came to prominence as part of a television show, and you may or may not have watched that television show. It's in Ukrainian, but it starts with a school teacher going on a rant against corruption, and it's accidentally caught on video. The video goes viral, and he becomes president of Ukraine. Um, his entire public persona has been built around this idea that he would stand up to corruption. And so it is it makes no sense to me whatsoever that he would be in this position now and supporting legislation that cuts back on the independence of those who investigate public corruption.
Yes, that's so interesting in the way you say that, because nobody was surprised that Donald Trump would remove all the people watching all these government agencies. It just seemed like that would be what Trump would do: get rid of these overseers of government efficiency and honesty, and look for corruption. But he got rid of all of them. But that seemed to be the way Trump would operate, more like a cowboy. This guy Zelensky sounds like he had ran specifically not to be a Trump.
Chris just lost the last bit of your question there.
Yeah, the question is, Zelensky ran to be an anti-Trump, not to be like Trump.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that he has become like Trump, but
No,
one thing that's obvious. One thing that's obvious is that for the last couple of years, every room that Zelensky has entered, he's been given a standing ovation. And let's not pretend that that doesn't change the way you think about yourself. That might not increase your level of arrogance, might not increase your perception of what your ego ought to be like.
yeah.
And Zelensky is obviously a very, very busy person. Just right. Or Ukrainian newspapers posted a new story that said that the EU was suspending aid to Ukraine until they reversed these decisions
Well,
on anti-corruption laws. This is a very serious thing. I mean, the EU, if Zelensky is not going to reverse himself, and he's already taken steps to start reversing himself. So this is up to the legislature to reverse later this week. It's going to be real trouble for the country. And
well,
I know people are saying that I'm going on some sort of anti-Zelensky rant as if this is getting personal, but this is not personal at all. This is about legislation and holding politicians to account, which is something that that I've always done. And Chris, I know you've been doing. I was saying, Chris, that that fundamentally there are no saints in politics except for maybe Teddy Roosevelt.
okay. Good point. I think I made that point in the last segment. But he really was true when he didn't run for re-election in 2008 or 1908 because he promised it. That's a simple thing. Do what you promise. Anyway, thank you so much, Tim Mike. I hope to have you back again with better recording ability and getting this straight. But it's been great having you so much. Thank you so much, Tim Mack from Ukraine.
Thank you.
So we're going to have Rick Wilson any moment now. Rick Wilson's a kind of an interesting guy. It's a world I don't really know much about. It's the modern Republican Party that has not been caught up in MAGAism, if you will. It seems to have a kind of a Northern California flavor in the sense that people are not culturally right wingers. They are, in fact, not so. They're more like Teddy Roosevelt. They're more like reformers in the old days of the Republican Party. And I think it's a good cause. It's the reason why Teddy Roosevelt, of course, is on Mount Rushmore. Never forget who gets on Mount Rushmore and who does not. And it's quite a prize to be up there with Lincoln and Jefferson and Washington. You can't beat that trio anyway. And he's up there. So we're going to have Rick Wilson on. Now we have him. Rick Wilson, thank you so much for joining us. What do you make of I want to give you 20 minutes to talk about the two parties. The two parties. Everybody thinks all my Democratic friends say, "Oh, if Trump is screwing up, then we're going to win." Oh yeah, I wonder because I don't think the Democrats are doing much at all to fix the problems that they went into the election with, which was immigration and the whole trans thing and the way they approached it and inflation. I don't hear any word out of them about how they deal with any of these problems. They've gone completely mute on the question of their problems. Well, don't you have to fix your problems before you move on? That's my thinking. What do you think?
Well, look, as the ex-Republican in the room, I know I'll get static from some of my Democratic friends for saying this, but the Democrats, I would strongly recommend learn a few lessons from 2024. Don't walk into these culture war traps the Republicans set for you. And if they do set them, and you find yourself in them, find a way to get out. You cannot win on things like the trans stuff with the vast majority of voters out in these swing seats. They either don't care about it or they're on the other side of you on it. There are a lot of things that they miscued on the economy. The voters do not trust the Democratic Party on the economy still. And if they come in to say to these voters, "Oh, well, we're going to pass all these complex policies that'll make it all better," they're going to put themselves in a position where the Republicans are going to cut their heads off again. The Democratic Party, they may be the one party that's sort of pro-democracy right now in the country, but the Republican Party wants power, wants to win, wants to stay in control, and it feels like they want it more than a lot of Democrats do. When I see Chuck Schumer saying, "I'm going to send a sternly worded letter," that's not the fight we're in, brother.
Yeah, that's going to really bounce off of Trump's table.
That's going to work.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I want to delineate it as we go through this.
Sure.
On the side, you've got Hakeem Jeffries, who's a good guy. I met in every way.
Sure. Yeah.
You've got Chuck, who we know he's been the war horse for all these years. Neither one of them think that they're leaders of the Democratic Party. They don't believe they are, and they aren't acting that way, and they're certainly not talking that way. Why not?
Yeah. Chris, I think this is something. I think there's a sense of shell shock in the Democratic Party. It's a hangover not only from 2024, it's a hangover from 2016. It's a hangover from the end of the Obama era, where they don't feel like the party has a single unifying leader or principle inside of it. They all feel like they've got to patch together this coalition of progressives on one side and centrists on the other and operational types on the other. And I don't think I think they end up in this kind of like trap of their own making. Sometimes you have to assert leadership and say, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to run this thing. This is what we're going to plan for. And I know Democrats in some cases don't want to hear, oh, we're going to go to central command and control. But there's a reason Republicans win, Chris. It is because they go out and they follow the same message. They get one lead and they follow it. They get one theme and they follow it. I'm not saying that's always a good theme or a good message or a good lead, but the Democrats look like they're all over the board to a lot of voters. They don't know what they believe in. They don't feel like Democrats come out and speak passionately about things that matter to most Americans out there in the country. We see this in poll after poll, focus group after focus group. You ask people, do you like Trump? Oh, not really. What do you think about the Democrats? They're chaotic. They don't know what they're doing. They're afraid to lead. They're afraid to do the hard work. They don't want to go out and fight. Because sometimes people will follow a fighter, even if they're not right about every single thing.
Let's go with that because I believe in strength. And I do what you just said, I believe in completely. Strength beats weakness. But the Democrats here. So if you're Chuck Schumer or you're Hakeem Jeffries, here's your problem. You have a chief of staff, a top person, man or woman, gives you advice. Now, every time you say you want to do something, here comes the advice. We got to support the closed border right now because there's been no conversation about it, no complaint about it. People seem to think we had to stop the surge in the short term. Now we have to be a little nicer, certainly much nicer to the people who have been here for a while. But on the closing of the border, why don't we just pass a bill saying that's a good thing? Let's codify that for a while. They'll hear somebody will walk in their door, an Hispanic leader, leading Hispanic Congress, and they will say, you can't do that. Why can't? Because I say you can't. Because that's it. They will say you can't because we will raise hell about it if you do that. We don't want you saying you're against illegal immigration. We don't want to have a party that is against illegal immigration. And the party has in the past with Hispanic leaders saying, we don't want national ID cards. We don't have anything like a national ID card because we had anything that could actually stop illegal immigration that would actually work. They don't want it. And
Chris,
we saw in the polls in the election of 2024, we saw they are not a monolithic ethnic group.
No.
There are Cubans. There are all kinds of people, Mexican Americans, who do not like socialism. They do not like the idea of free access to the United States. They like to get where they're going and become middle class or upper middle class. That's what they want. And everything else is in the way.
Chris, it's interesting because Vice President Harris actually almost got there a couple of times talking about immigration, didn't quite close the deal, where she started to say, wait, Trump's going to make us less safe. This is not going to be this isn't what he's promising you for real. The Democrats have an opportunity to say, you know what? For people who have committed actual violent crimes in this country, ship them out, put them in CCOT, take them out. That's it. You can't win that argument with middle-class America. That is deeply wired in. And a lot of those people, as you just pointed out correctly, in the Hispanic community who are first generation, second generation, naturalized, and even aspiring to be naturalized, they don't like the criminal element. They don't want their communities being threatened by crime and violence by people who would bring that to this country. So that's an easy lift.
Why doesn't Chuck say that? Why did
They look over their Chris. Well, you just said it. They're looking over their left shoulder. They're worried that somebody on the progressive side is going to go, oh no, we need to open the border, free citizenship for anybody who wants it, and they're afraid of their own shadow. You can't. I mean, one of the brilliant things about the Republican Party is it let a bunch of different people in.
These are the General McClellans of the Civil War.
Yes.
Who never win the Civil War because they don't want to fight it.
Right. If you don't want to use your army, let me give it to somebody who will.
Lincoln said, let me give Grant who wants to win the war. And,
Mhm.
and they, on the trans thing, I don't know the solution. I think women, men, trans people should be able to compete in sports. Of course they should be able to. The question is, what team should they be on?
Right.
Should they be women's team? Of course, once you pass puberty, the doctors say that you're a man or whatever, a woman, and it becomes, let's put it this way, complicated. It just becomes complicated. The Republicans make it very simple. You got some 6-foot guy or competing in a women's sport, and they say, "What, you like this? We're for you. They're for them." And they won that. Where they won an argument in the middle of the NFL games or the World Series games. They won that argument there.
You know, Chris, when Republicans ended up picking up a lot more young white men than they thought they would, and a lot more young African American, a lot more young Hispanic men, it's because those young African American and Hispanic and white guys were watching ESPN and watching sporting events and watching World Wrestling and watching MMA. And those ads were pounding in on there, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of those ads from the presidency on down. And it was a culture war argument. The Democrats, they even knew in their own polling and focus groups was not working. They knew they were taking damage on it. But we had a conversation at one point with one of the big Democratic super PACs. They're like, well, we can't do anything about this because our own constituents will be upset with us because if it will look like we're not defending the trans community.
Who are their constituents who say they wanted men playing women's sports?
Well, right. Listen, it was completely illogical. It was a classic blunder of believing that the people on your team broadly, that any voice that departs the team kills the whole thing. It doesn't. Sometimes you got to have a sister soldier moment. Sometimes you've got to have some toughness with your own side. And I hate Trump with the fire of a million suns, but he is very smart about one thing in his party. When somebody strays, he goes after him. He tries to bring pain onto people who stray from his party, and it trained them to not stray from the party. Almost none of them until this Epstein stuff. Well, that's a little different matter. But
I want to go with you on that. We have time. We have delineated the Democratic Party's problems. It's lack of leadership. It's a lack of guts. They're not willing to take on the fact that they're in an 80-20 situation and they're with the 20. When you're running a national campaign on the 20% is crazy. If you really believe it, however, do it. But if you don't really believe it, if you don't really think your position on this trans thing is credible and believable and people believe in it and you believe in it, don't do it. Why are you fighting on that hill? And why are they fighting on the hill of big government spending? You didn't talk about it. Democrats, 41% or 42% of all government inflation comes from government spending. That was in the MIT economics study, the best economics department in the country.
Yep.
How come the Democrats don't believe in the Phillips curve? Then when you gin up the economy, you gin up prices. That's a fact. And every time a Democrat would say to me, oh, but the GDP is doing great, I said, yeah, that's why the inflation is zooming. You guys have done it. You've overspent. And they don't understand that. They don't want to understand that, do they?
You know, and it's funny because the Republicans now have handed them almost a perfect weapon on this to try to seize back the mantle of fiscal responsibility, to try to get it back. As we know, when Bill Clinton was president, we balanced the freaking budget. Nobody's done that for a long time since. But the Republicans in the big bill have spent so much. They've jacked the deficit and the debt. Democrats could go in and go at this from the right.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Republican Party while we have a chance. It seems I know I have a couple of brothers who are MAGA. One of them is broken with Trump on Ukraine. He thinks we really should be Ukraine.
Right.
And my other brother is a little more country club. He just likes him. He puts it, me and my pals are all for Trump. Real simple.
Yeah.
To me, that simple argument. When's Trump going to not break free from Jeffrey Epstein? When are the MAGA people to say, you're one of them, to use the code of the trans people. You're one of them.
Right. It's funny because there are more known victims of Jeffrey Epstein than there are trans athletes in the country right now. And it's funny that we were ignoring a problem that is horrifying, and they obsessed about a problem that was, fairly small relative to the overall population. I think Epstein has done something to the MAGA base, Chris. For 10 years, they believed in this myth that Hillary Clinton and George Soros and all these other Democrats were in a pizza restaurant abusing children. And it was crazy. And the people at the top of MAGA, Trump and the influencers in MAGA, they all knew it was a joke, or they thought it was a joke. But the people below that in the base started to believe it. And for a decade, they have believed in their hearts that Epstein is the key to understanding like a Democrat pedophile conspiracy, blah, blah, craziness, right? And now Trump is the guy who is protecting himself and other billionaires who were supposedly involved in Epstein's sex ring, his pedophile ring, whatever you want to call it, rape ring. And he's going to pardon Ghislaine Maxwell, who was a monster who recruited these girls and abused these girls. And they're having a real problem processing it. They cannot get this one. Normally, MAGA has a great gift of like letting fantasy reset their belief about Trump. But this has broken a lot of them off, and I don't know how much longer he can sustain what he's been doing, which is throw everything at the wall. None of it's working, and the Epstein stuff is like a slow bleed, and the cover up now is increasingly obvious inside DOJ. I don't see how he gets out of this box yet.
He's blaming it. He's now saying that Barack Obama is a traitor. He's going to try treason. All these efforts to try to deflect attention elsewhere, as you say, just doesn't, for some reason, doesn't crack through the MAGA love of the Jeffrey Epstein story. That Pizzagate, the Comet Pizza, which is down Connecticut Avenue from where I live. It's a family restaurant. We used to take our kids there. Hopefully someday we'll take kids there. It's a fun place. You sit at tables of old people. You eat a lot of pizza, pepperoni pizza. They have ice cream for dessert, no coffee. It's a wonderful place.
And no basement.
And there's nothing conspiratorial about it except that guy to come in there waving the rifle, shooting into the ceiling, which is
crazy.
A result of this conspiracy theory.
They believed it so passionately and for so long that it's just really hard for them to let go of that story. And again, even if I give them like the absolute benefit of all the doubt, and they believe this because they really thought they were saving the children or something like that, the problem that Trump has now given them is that he's the one protecting Ghislaine Maxwell now. He's the one saying there's no there. There never was a list. There never was a sex island. There never was any of this other stuff. And the truth of the matter is, they are not believing their own guy. And this is the first time in a decade, Chris, that they've really said something's wrong here. Trump isn't being straight with me. I don't believe what Trump is saying. And that has shaken his power more than anything else I've ever seen in the last decade.
It seems to me, if she was the one trafficking and she was charged for life, basically, that she's guilty of knowing, in effect, who the Johns are, who the customers were. Wouldn't she?
Sure.
And if she knows who the customers were, the Democrat, Republican, whatever, she has them in her head right now in prison. She has those names in her head.
100%. And what I think Trump's lawyer went down to Florida to do was to get her to say, hey, Ghislaine, you could get a pardon. He can't pardon you yet, but by the end, you'll only be 2 more years. You should mention that Bill Clinton was there. You should mention that whoever was, but Donald left early, right? I mean, this thing is so crooked and it stinks so much that I think there's a reason that even his own people have been very skeptical about it.
That Robert Duvall played when he went to visit Johnny Five Angels.
Right.
And gave him a card book and tells him, now, if you commit suicide, then all this is going to go away. Your family will be protected. Your brother will be protected in Italy. You got nothing to worry about. So that's the role of his lawyer this time. His lawyer is going down to talk to Ms. Maxwell and try to offer her the deal of a lifetime, which means you get out of prison, you
Yep.
don't talk, and I'm safe.
That Chris, I think look, Occam's razor is pretty accurate, and there's no other reason for Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General of the U.S., to fly down here on a Thursday afternoon to meet with Ghislaine Maxwell, bring her a damn gift basket practically, and walk out that door saying, "Oh, we're making great progress." With what? With what exactly? The thing is, it just stinks on ice, man. And nobody, I don't think anybody, even in MAGA world, is saying, "Oh, this is on the up and up." It doesn't. It smells so bad, and it's so obviously corrupt, that I mean, in an ordinary world, a conspiracy theory and a cover up, requires really smart people. Blanche is not stupid, but the rest of the people around this cover up are not smart people. And
Who knows besides Donald Trump that if he has any involvement or his friends have any involvement with Epstein? Does anybody else have the access to this story besides Trump?
I really don't. In his administration, I don't think anybody.
Yeah.
I think they're all operating on how do we defend Donald no matter what. I don't think he would level with any of them. He doesn't trust anybody past the tip of his own nose. And I think Pam Bondi's on thin ice already. I think, Patel and Bongino at the FBI are clowns. I don't think he trusts them at all. He does believe, though, I think that a lot of these people will defend him and guess what the boss wants, commander's intent, as they say in the military. And protecting him is what he wants. He wants to be protected from her saying anything. And I get why that's an appealing thought to him, is if she shuts up, Jeffrey Epstein's dead. The victims aren't being listened to in the mainstream press to the degree that I think they should, at least be listened to. And I think he feels like he could almost get away with it. But he's acted. I mean, that thing from the Bible, Proverbs 28:1, the guilty man flees when no one pursues him. Well, Trump's fleeing and everybody's pursuing him, and it's so obvious how much this has freaked him out.
Rick, you're great. Let me just say my for a counterpoint here very quickly. I think the Democrat solution is talk about economic issues. Talk about Medicaid, how we're losing millions of people off of Medicaid, which is very important to their lifestyles, not lifestyles, lives.
Lives, yeah.
Well, because if you get Alzheimer's and you have to go to a home when you get very old, your family places you there. That's the family's decision, but they can't make that decision without Medicaid because Medicare doesn't cover that stuff. Now, that's
100%.
the number thing. The Democrats should to focus off. Let AOC do her thing. Bernie Sanders do his thing. You can't stop them because they're Democrats. They're doing something that they believe in. But as a party, you should say, we have three things we're running on in 2026. All we want is about 5 seats. We'd like to get about 15 or 20, but we'll take the 5. And here's what. These are economic issues. We're talking about inflation, which has gotten worse and promises to get still worse because of the tariffs. I'm going to talk about Medicaid. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about corruption. This family crazy, doing all this crazy stuff with crypto and all this stuff.
100%.
It's not so clear, but 3 hard economic issues, and make sure every one of your rank and file in the Democratic Party, candidates, people running for re-election, talk about those 3 things over and over again. Don't let anybody else define you. Define yourself. Don't let AOC define you. Don't let Bernie define you. You do it as Democratic leaders and talk about your party's history and be bragging about your party's history. Don't hide from Jefferson and Jackson and Lyndon Johnson and Kennedy and all those people. Run as a party and be proud of it and be talking about the 3 hard things you care about and never mention the cultural stuff. Let the New York Times put that on the front page.
Right. Let them worry about that shit. But Chris, I think you're absolutely right. By the time we're at this point next year, if Democrats aren't every single day pounding on your groceries cost more, gas costs more, your rent costs more, your interest rates are up, Donald Trump promised you an economic miracle, and what you got was an economic hell. And if they're not doing that this summer next time, we're going to lose, or they're going to keep the House. Mike Johnson will still be Speaker. If they go off on every other tangent of climate and guns and trans and everything else, as I always tell Democrats, like, settle those issues when you have power again. Right now, you've got to run and win, and running and winning is going to center next year on the economy. I hope Trump is like broken by Epstein, but it's not going to be the thing Democrats are running ads on next year in swing seats in New York and California and Florida and everywhere else. They're going to have to go into those places and make an economic case that this guy promised you the world and he screwed you over.
When are the Republicans going to crack up? I mean, we've got Fitzpatrick, we've got Collins, but they're the only outliers that really didn't want.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, there are some tiny fractures now occurring, maybe a little bigger than tiny, because of Epstein, but it hasn't broken the party's loyalty on every other issue yet, and that's going to take a little while longer. You know, one of my rules in politics is that pain is the only teacher. And I think if Trump's behavior becomes so erratic and the Epstein stuff becomes so much that it makes him just crazy every day, I think then we will start to see some other Republicans saying, yeah, he was great, but, now I've got to focus on me. Now I'm going to run back. What he broke in 2016 was Republicans don't represent constituents anymore in Congress. They represent him.
Yes.
They don't represent the 5th District of Virginia. They represent the first and only district of Donald. And so I think they're going to have to break on that at some point soon.
I think so. You got to defend your constituency. Rick, you're a great guest. I will try to get you back again at some point.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you having me on.
Great to have you on. Thank you so much. Thanks, Chuck Todd. Thanks to Tim Mack over in Ukraine. We had a little problem with connecting with him, but I thought it was a great show. Everybody had something to say, and everybody spoke out loud, and nobody hid anything. And thank you all today for making this a great hardball show. Thank you so much right here. And thank you, Chris Paleo-Lazar, my producer. Thank you so much.
See you soon, Chris.
We got to figure it out. I think
We're still on. We're still on.